Thank you very much for being here with us today, Frank. We're very excited to have you, and go ahead and take it from here.
Sweet. Hey guys and gals, great to be with you. Stoked to share with you about Golden Coast Mead, what we do here, and mead making, how to make mead. My intention with this little webinar is to arm you guys with the knowledge about mead, its background, how it helps the bees, what's facing the bees, and then how to make some so you can get started. I'm imagining a lot of you guys are into permaculture, and some of you may even have your own permaculture farm enterprises, and I think that mead making could be a function you could consider stacking on your enterprise, whether you're underway or in planning. So hoping to share with you how we make mead. We're very open source. It was very cool to see Marcin Jakubowski from Open Source Ecology was one of the first guys on PermaEthos, because he has been a big role model and mentor, and we want to open source what we're doing here so other people can make great mead where they're at and help save the bees in their own communities and connect people with quality regenerative drinks. So that's what we like. I'm gonna get my presentation started by sharing the screen. There it goes. All right, Golden Coast Mead. Frank Golbeck. I'm Frank Golbeck, and this is the regenerative mead journey. All right, so our goal is to delight people, define regenerative mead, and regenerate apiculture through mead. And when we do that, it's a good time. I went to Berkeley, was in the Navy. That was kind of rough. Glad I made it through the other side and started beekeeping. My wife, Teresa, asked me what I would do with all the time, money, and energy in the world. And I said I would make mead and share it with people. And she said, well, you should figure that out. So I did, and I'm sure you guys have seen this image before. It's from The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, and it talks about, you know, at the end, after all the trees have been cut down, all the animals have been extricated, the guy who did all the cutting down tosses the last seed to the kid who's hearing the story. And I don't know if you guys identify with this, but sometimes I feel that way. Like, we've got this chance to regenerate the world, but how do we do it? Well, my approach is mead. My grandpa was a mead maker. He grew apples in Southern California outside of Los Angeles at a place called Oak Glen, and Los Rios was the apple ranch. And when he retired from growing apples, he made mead. So I'll launch into that story a little bit. And as I discovered it, man, I found out all kinds of awesome things, like gods drank mead, and that we could start a business and people would buy our stuff. So I'll run through that with you guys over the course of the next hour, and we'll talk about how to make mead, and then there'll be a good opportunity for Q&A. So my first mead, my grandpa was an apple grower, as I mentioned, and I was 8 years old behind the bar, and there are all these like kind of foreign adults in the tasting room. He had a little fruit winery, and he had a licensed tasting room, so he would pour samples. But when the mead would come out, the adults would transform. And to my 8-year-old self, they would stop being scary foreigners, and they'd be these like laughing, vibrant people. And I was like, what is this potion that my grandpa is pouring for these people? And he was like, oh, it's an adult drink made from honey. I was like, well, that sounds awesome. And he ended up having to sell the apple ranch to a nature conservancy, luckily. So it's still around and it's still beautiful, but our family is no longer involved. And he closed up the winery, and it was years until mead resurfaced. And it did resurface a number of times, and I was finally able to help him clean out the garage. And there in the attic of the garage was one case of his old fruit wines and one bottle of his mead. And he gave it to me, and it was like sunshine and flowers in the glass. I shared it with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and my best friend at the time, who helped me start the business. So it is a very special thing to me, and I found that as I started making it in the basement of my student co-op in college and sharing it with friends, other people found it very special too. We would drink like 5 gallons in a night, and dance parties would ensue. And so when my wife asked me that question, what if I had all the time, money, and energy in the world? What would I do? It was pretty easy to answer: make mead and share it with people. So I learned more about mead, and I learned that mead is one of the first, if not the first, alcoholic beverage. Because if you think anthropologically, you think ecologically, honey is our richest sugar source that naturally occurs. You don't need sedentary agriculture to make honey. You just need to find some beehives. So Golden Coast Mead is a company that I run, and we sell mead in 5 states: Southern California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and DC. We have a tasting room in San Diego County, Oceanside, Northeast San Diego County, or Northwest San Diego County, and then we have now kind of Julian, which is a kind of touristy spot in San Diego County. So I'd like to say we're established. We have 10 employees. We're a growing mead business, lots of cool moving parts and lots of opportunities. So I want to see us define regenerative mead. When we started, our mission was figure out if people will buy mead from us. And now our mission is save the bees with mead, with regenerative mead. Don't build a monster that will be as much of a problem as the other alcoholic industries out there, but instead build an alcohol production industry that is regenerative. So that's the direction that we're going in, and we're making really deliberate decisions as we do. Some of them we have to backtrack on, and one of those things is the East Coast distribution model. So we're kind of bringing it back to Southern California. We got 29 million people within 300 miles of us. Like, I think we can hit our revenue targets and create the purchasing power we need to shift the honey supply if we can sell it successfully in this Southern California market. So that's kind of the vision. And back to the story of mead. So mead was probably the first alcoholic beverage because you didn't need sedentary agriculture to make the sugar required to do fermentation, right? Fermentation, alcohol production, is the process, the biological process of converting sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide through yeast metabolizing, that sugar. So it's in every culture around the world. Mead was in Africa probably 20,000 years ago, and it's still drunk today in Ethiopia and the Horn. They call it Suwa or Tej. The Vikings, of course, were drinking it. And in India, it's mentioned a number of times. It shows up in the literature from these places as well. So we've got Dostoevsky writing about mead in Brothers K. We've got the Rig Veda, where Krishna walks across the universe and his footsteps are filled with mead, and that's what makes morning, noon, and night to the Hindus. You've got Beowulf drinking mead before and after slaying monsters, and there's Dumbledore as well, who conjures mead out of thin air. But why do we do this? Because more mead equals more bees and more life. I see mead being fundamentally different from beer and wine because you do not need monoculture to produce it. You need bees on top of healthy, thriving, diverse ecosystems. And that honey that they produce is a reflection of that ecosystem, a unique reflection of that ecosystem. And so the mead that you make is a reflection of a healthy, beautiful ecosystem in the bottle that you can drink and sell to your customers and friends. And regenerative business, right? Like creating surplus out of the life of a system. It's a really exciting shift to be involved in, and I'm excited to share it with you guys. So as you guys know, honeybee health is seriously problematic right now. Annual loss for the managed honeybee colonies has been way higher than acceptable losses. Over 40% died last year. We see an opportunity to shift the honey market with mead. there's all these factors that are influencing the negative health of the bees, from the Varroa destructor mite, which is like, if a honeybee was the size of a human, the mite would be the size of a rabbit, and it just sticks right between their wings and sucks their blood. It also vectors a major virus and a major fungus, excuse me, not a fungus, a major bacteria that really weaken the bees. Then the bees are out there pollinating monocrops, so they're not getting a diverse amount of nutrition. They're stressed out from the pollination. They're stressed out from competition with all the other bees. They're stressed out from being put on the back of trucks and driven across the country. So their immune systems are depressed. Then they're exposed to neonicotinoid pesticides, which it has been shown limit their desire to forage and their ability to make it home. So they're bringing home less food to the hive if they even make it home. So all these factors stack together, and you just get worker bees disappearing from the hive. You get huge deaths. And this chart that I've got here shows how we had a peak of 5.5 million hives in the US in 1950, and now we're hovering around half of that amount. So how can we regenerate that? How can we put more bees out there? Because 44% of the top 107 crop varieties are pollinated by bees. We've got a big reliance on these bees, and they're flipping awesome in and of themselves, let alone the service that they provide to us as humans. You know, in places where they do not have enough bees, like China, people are hand pollinating their crops. So that's teams of people out in the fields with bottles of pollen around their necks and little cotton swabs, and they're hand pollinating each flower. So without the bees, what that does to our food system is an end state I don't want to get to. So what can I do? I can make mead and I can share it with people. That's my goal. And hopefully in doing so, build a value chain for our honey suppliers so that they don't have to do pollination services anymore to make a living. When you're a beekeeper and you're looking at professional beekeeping, you can either go huge and do pollination services, or stay small and sell through the farmers markets. But that's a break-even proposition if you're lucky. And the big guys are just like white knuckle holding on, hoping that they can stay ahead of their hive losses every year. There's no middle class anymore. There's not a industry of beekeepers with 500 to 1,000 hives who can make a good living keeping those bees well. And that's where I see the meat industry as a big game changer, and really excited to share this with you, a bunch of doers and makers out there who want to regenerate the world. I think meat is a great avenue towards doing so. There's great margins. There's definitely a market for it, right? And I'll touch on those things a little bit later. But the why is compelling. We're giving 1% of our gross revenue through 1% for the planet to Dr. James Nye at UCSD, who's doing research on colony collapse disorder and how to solve it. He's also demonstrating the sublethal effects of neonicotinoid pesticides on bees, like how it inhibits their ability to get home and their desire to forage. We're building a more local honey supply. We work with a gal who's starting her own apiary, and we have a contract with her to buy all of her honey, and we helped her start her apiary. So she's kind of our staff beekeeper, quote unquote. We've got a local beekeeper who provides us honey for our specialty batches. The Mikoliches have been growing honey in Southern California for like 40 years. Really great people mentored me on some beekeeping, and we do a specialty mirth in a bottle batch that retail for $20 a bottle. But it's a great story and a great opportunity to connect people with local honey and how local mead can reflect a local place. We want to be involved in sharing this with all the systems that impact the mead industry. So you've got the honey and bee systems, and you've got the winemaking and beverage alcohol world, and you've got the consumer. We want to show them that regenerative mead can change the status quo. So we're working with UC Davis, who's done a lot of work. There's now an advanced mead makers course. There's an intro to mead making course and an advanced mead makers course that UC Davis teaches, and we helped start that. The American Mead Makers Association, we're on the research and development board there, because we're doing stuff that no one else is doing in terms of understanding successful fermentation and publishing that with White Labs, which is exciting. And then we've got this conference for the audacious visions for the beekeeping, which we are looking forward to sharing about our vision for building a middle class of beekeepers through mead making. All right, so how does this tie into regenerative apiculture, regenerative agriculture? And I see the big opportunity with rangeland farms. So mead brings more money to beekeepers than beekeepers give money to regenerative farms with big grasslands, with big bee pastures, and actually stack a revenue model on top of their already existing revenue model. And the bees are just gathering nectar from the flowering plants on that farm. That then makes awesome honey, makes awesome mead, and it's a virtuous cycle. Got a little case study here from Bee Girl. She's an activist up in Bee Girl is an activist organization doing great stuff about honeybee awareness and regenerating the health of the honeybee. And so she visited Lazy R Ranch and just saw huge amounts of flowers in a dry, deserty Eastern Washington setting. And she was like, if we could put bees on top of this, throw a pollinator mix of seeds on top of this rangeland and irrigate it, the potential for bees and beekeepers could be phenomenal. So that's the direction we want to go. To us, success looks like 500 beekeepers across the U.S. with 500 to 1,000 hives who are making a healthy living by providing bee healthy honey from healthy land for a vibrant mead industry. That means we got to sell a lot of mead, though, 450 million. And the math is at the bottom. Do we, Golden Coast Mead, have to sell all of that? No, the mead industry does, but it has to be regenerative mead. And like regenerative mead right now is a very, very small thing. I don't even know if it's an economically viable thing because the mead market is so small. But if we build the mead market and people start to demand that high quality mead made from this regenerative honey, then we're going to have the pulling force from the customer to make those investments and make it happen. So that's part of my reason for sharing this with you guys too. So if you want to make this mead and get compelled by this vision, we can build it together. If you want to just be a mead drinker because you realize that beer and wine are made from monocultures that kill the earth. Sorry, I usually don't use that strong of language with other audiences, but I feel like it's appropriate here. Then mead is what you should reach for because at its best, it does not require monoculture. It just requires bees on top of healthy ecosystems so they're not displacing those healthy ecosystems. So hopefully we get conscious consumers demanding mead every time they go to drink. And there's different styles of mead. Mead is the whole spectrum of alcohol, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. We did some brand foundation. We found that millennial foodies who care about the earth are target audience, and they exist, in all the progressive markets around the country. They don't have to be millennials, though. It's really anyone who wants their purchases to align with their values. So if you guys want to start mead businesses, we should talk more about this. And when you get this going, when you do this, like we have our tasting room, there were some pictures of it back earlier with all those happy people around the table. But when you get it going and you evangelize this with people, they get it. This was a quote from a group who worked in a couple hip restaurants in downtown San Diego, and they came all the way up here about an hour from them and tasted the mead and spent a couple hours with us. And like they said, this is more than just alcohol. This is what's going on. It's like a spiritual, environmental, social movement. Kind of reminds me of something else we're all involved in together here. Oh yes, permaculture. Sorry. And people love it. It's a different experience. They get to come and share mead with us and have a great experience, and they want to bring their friends back. So it's very exciting. Market possibility is huge. Craft beer is 20 billion. Beer and wine in America is 138 billion. That's like roughly half of the size of agriculture industry in America. So if we can have an impact on the alcohol industry, I think we can start to have an impact on the bigger ag picture as well. And people, price sensitivity is not as high on alcoholic beverages as it is on food. People will pay more for drinks as long as it's within a certain threshold. So we can make the margins that we need as smaller producers and make our business models work. And look at kombucha and cider. Like, they weren't things 4 years ago, and now they're $600 million industries. So hopefully there's opportunity for all of us there. All right, to make mead. So honey, water, and yeast. That's really all it takes. But if you do it that way, it's probably not going to turn out great unless you're really lucky. Honey is naturally antiseptic. It wants to kill yeast. Yeast, when it's trying to survive, puts off byproducts of stressful fermentations. And those stressful fermentations taste bad to humans. So we want to make the yeast really happy, which means we've got to manipulate the honey and the fermentation environment so that they are happy. What I've got in these slides is a pretty introductory approach to mead making for those who've never tried it before. And in our Q&A, we can get a little bit into the weeds on how we've refined that process and turned what used to be a 6-month production process for us down to a 2-week production process. And we make mead that people want to drink. You know, people drink they come into our tasting room on Friday and a 5-gallon keg kicks in a day, which is good because we sell that for significantly more than it costs to make it. And then we can have a successful business. So honey, water, yeast is the basics, but it's a lot more than that. You mix the honey and the water together. You stir vigorously. You add yeast. Yeast are going to be, trillions of organisms in that bucket. So is good energy going to change their starting position like all other fractals? I don't know, but it can't hurt, right? Store in a cool, dark place once you've mixed it up. Keep the bugs out with an airlock, and the yeast will do its job. Convert the sugar into alcohol and carbonation, and you'll transfer it from the old jug once it stops bubbling to the new jug to get it off the yeast, because that thin layer of cream-colored yeast at the bottom of the jug that's elevated is dead yeast, and if the yeast stick around for too long, they start to die, and that changes the flavor of your mead. If it was an unhappy fermentation, then that makes the flavor bad. So you want to get them off the yeast as quickly as you can, unless you had a really healthy fermentation, which is more advanced mead making stuff, which we'll cover. Bottle the mead. So this is a simple process, but what I've found is to avoid bottle bombs is to increase your likelihood of doing more in the future. Bottle bombs really demotivate home mead makers. That's when there's too much sugar in the bottle after you bottled it, so the yeast wake back up because you probably didn't remove all the yeast because you don't have the super expensive filtration equipment and stuff. So even if the mead looks clear, there's a risk that the yeast is still suspended in the liquid, and it's going to eat that sugar, and it's going to start to create CO2 in the bottle. And certain bottles are stronger than others. Champagne bottles are stronger than others. A typical beer bottle can only hold like 18 psi, but a typical champagne bottle can hold over 100, I think. I'm pretty fast and loose with back of the envelope numbers, so that's just to give you a sense of order of magnitude, not to give you a sense for what's really the physics governing the situation. But we've done the math before, and this is a number that I'm comfortable with. If you put it in a champagne bottle with less than 1% sugar left over, it shouldn't explode, even if it wakes back up and eats all that sugar. So that's my rule of thumb for safety with home mead making. You only want to bottle it when there's less than 1% residual sugar without stabilizing it. We don't use sulfites or sorbates, which people use to stabilize their fermentations after they bottle to prevent bottle bombs. So instead, we put it in a champagne bottle with less than 1% residual sugar. So if you pay attention to that, and that is a measurement that you learn how to take with a hydrometer, and we can cover that a little bit in advanced mead making, then you should avoid those bottle bombs or those bad situations. Or just drink it quick enough, and you won't have to worry about it either. All right, then cork or cap the mead with a hand capper or corker, and corks and caps. The equipment list is pretty simple. It's, you know, your homebrew kit minus the burners and boilers. We don't heat, we just mix honey and water. So you don't need to do the whole brewing process that makes beer making more complicated. And honey is, you know, readily available, whereas wine grapes and grape juice ready for making wine is not necessarily. So it's a very easy thing to start making on your home farm. And you definitely want sanitizing solution. You want a fermentation container. Some people use high density polyethylene buckets. We like to use glass carboys when we're doing 5-gallon batches. Your honey is a big choice. Mead is a very naked fermentation, and your two major flavor ingredients are your honey and your yeast. So you want honey. Starting out, I always recommend that you stick with honey that is either fruity and floral in flavor profile and aroma profile. Like, what is the taste that you get after the sweetness goes away? Because that is the taste that will be in the mead once the sweetness is metabolized by the yeast. So you don't want like eucalyptus. You don't want like weird things that smell like cat urine. You want floral, fruity honeys that taste and smell good. And will smell good once the sweetness is gone. Yeast is also a big choice, and we stick with S01E07, which is an ale yeast. It is a workhorse. It comes in a dry packet, so you don't have to worry about shelf stability too much as long as you get it from the mail the day it comes and put it in the fridge or the freezer. It is a very neutral fermenter, so different yeasts create different flavor profiles. There are yeasts that were isolated for production of red wines from Burgundy, and there are yeasts that were isolated for production of Hefeweizen beers from Germany. And these two yeasts are like the same species, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but they're like way different breeds, like breeds of dog, right? The Hefeweizen yeast will like create these banana esters and will have a very bready and beer-like body to it, whereas the Burgundy red wine yeast will have these like intense, fruity and tart characteristics that are there even when there's no acid in the fermentation media. So yeast is like, it's like learning how to paint and understanding the difference between your paints and your brush, or your paints and your canvas. You know, your yeast is like your brush and your honey is like your paint. And you want to master them both. So there's a lot of trial and error involved there. Starting with S01E07 is a pretty surefire way to make a mead that you're going to want to drink at the end, as long as it's from a honey that you're going to want to eat. So getting started with this equipment list is pretty straightforward, $150. We talked about honey, we talked about yeast, we talked about water. Again, on the honey piece, get something fruity and floral. Something malty and caramely can also work for your first batches, but stay away from things that have like vegetal or resinous flavor profiles. Yeast nutrient. So I mentioned earlier how you want the yeast to be happy. Well, honey doesn't have any nitrogen for the yeast to metabolize and turn into lipids. So you want to give them that nitrogen. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. We'll talk a little bit in advanced mead making about the way we do it. But you're going to need some nutrient to give them that nitrogen so that they can, in their first little stage of life, build strong cell walls and survive in a high alcohol, stressful environment. We've got airlock. That's the little device at the top of the mead jug that keeps the air from coming in and lets the CO2 go out. It's a very cool little device. Second fermentation vessel, that's to rack off of your dead yeast and allow to settle and clarify without getting those yeast flavors taking over. Because mead is a very thin fermentation. Wine brings tannins and acids to the game from the grapes. Beer brings complex carbohydrates from the grain. Neither of those sets of things are in mead. So what you're left over is a very delicate liquid medium that's going to show subtle changes in flavor, like amplifying music. You know, you're going to notice if something's off very easily in mead. And that was one of the questions that was asked. I've never had a mead that I like. And that's because there's very little understanding on how to make great mead every time. And we think we're writing part of the chapter of that book, and UC Davis is helping to legitimize us, and so is White Labs. So hopefully there'll be a how to make mead great every time book soon. But what we're doing is sharing what we're doing while we're going, and hopefully if you like our stuff, you follow our recipe and you can make mead that you like. Racking cane, little device to help you get the liquid from the original carboy into the new carboy. Hose to help that happen. Bottles, corks, corker, $150. All right, so advanced mead making. So you guys are capable people, otherwise you wouldn't be on this podcast. So I'm going to spend the second half of my presentation, or in the next 20 minutes, talking about advanced mead making, and then we'll have 30 minutes for questions. So the first point to start with, if you're getting serious about your mead making, is sanitation. There's a difference between cleaning and sanitizing, which I'm sure you guys know, but I'm going to go over it. Cleaning is removing all the solid debris that can harbor environments for bacteria to live, bacteria and other spoilage organisms to live. Sanitation is the process that you do after you clean. All the solids have been removed. It looks clean. You scrubbed it with soap and a sponge. All the solids are off of it. Now you're going to put it into a solution or an environment that kills 99.99% of the bacteria, right? You're wiping out the other organisms that would compete with your yeast. You're not sterilizing it, which is killing 100%, because that would just be impractical. But you are sanitizing everything. And so that means hot water, and that means a sanitizing solution. We like to use Star San. It's $16 for a 16-ounce jug, and that thing will last you 20 batches at least. So Star San is an easy way to get started. There's also Idea 4. It can work. There's benefits to it. It doesn't foam up. It works in cold water. But if you're not really good at using it, it can sometimes throw off flavor, in my experience. Star San is also a no-rinse sanitizer. Since it's potassium-based, it doesn't get people sick, and it actually may give the yeast some of the nutrients that they need to really thrive in honey fermentation. So I recommend Star San. Nutrients. All right, so I touched on this, and this is where the state of the industry is really focused right now. How do we introduce nutrients to maximize fermentation success and flavor profile? So different people are doing different approaches to that. And the one that we've settled on, and we're not saying that this is the end-all be-all solution, but it's the one that's working for us now, and we're kind of moving on in our focus to other recipes and areas of R&D. But we're totally open to coming back to this, and we intend to come back to it once we kind of take the next step with the business. We'll come back to the nutrients. This is going to get in the weeds, and before I really get into the weeds, I want to preface it, Joel Salatin, if you don't know what to do something, right? You could sit here and nerd out on the arguments about nutrient addition for a really long time, and still wouldn't have a complete picture, because there isn't one. It is an area of active innovation and research. So what I would recommend, if you guys want to get into mead making or want to up your mead making game, is do it in a disciplined, regular way. Make new batches every 2 weeks, taking the information that you got from the last batch and make it better each time. So, but if you sit there in that state of just research and observation, you're not going to take any action, and it's not going to be grounded in practice, and you're not going to clear that knowledge, practice, mastery process. So this is where we're at, and I'm stoked to share it with you guys, but it's not perfect, but it's enough to get started. So what do? We take GoFirm, which is a nutrient that's designed specifically for rehydrating dry yeast, right? The dry yeast are these little balls of brownish gray material, and it's like yeast that has been cryogenically frozen, and we're waking them back up, and they're going to want to eat before they do anything. So we give them Go Firm to get them that first food source that they need to get started. They wake back up. You only give it to them in the first 20 minutes of life. And then your honey water mix, we add ferment O, which is an organic yeast nutrient. It's basically dead yeast that's been dried out. And we stir that into the honey water mix, and we pitch the yeast that's been rehydrated with the ferment O, or excuse me, the Go Firm. So need nutrients for cell walls and to support metabolism. Right. So during that first like 24 hours, the yeast are rapidly scavenging nitrogen and oxygen. So we aerate that honey water mix. When we mix it, we stir it vigorously, whether that's with a drill and an attachment or a bucket and a spoon. You know, we want as much oxygen into that initial honey water mix as possible, and we want this nitrogen source because these yeasts are going to be taking this nitrogen and this oxygen and turning it into lipids, a little bit of the honey as well, and turning it into lipids so that they have strong cell walls that will give them the best chance of living all the way through the fermentation and eating all of the sugar in that honey water mix, turning it all into alcohol. So you've got the rehydration of the yeast. You've got the aeration of the initial honey water mix called the must. Then you've got the addition of the ferment O to that must. Now your next step is to put it all together and seal it up and come back 24 hours later. Hopefully there's some bubbling going on. There's some fermentation starting to happen. And this is where we start to stagger our nutrient additions. We use Fermade K and we use Fermade K and DAP. These are just different forms of nitrogen that can be really intense on the yeast when they get started. And from an ecological perspective, they're not the best. Like DAP is ammonia-based nitrogen, so we love to figure out a alternative solution that gets us off of DAP. But from our initial trials with just using Ferment O versus using DAP and Ferment K, the yeast really fermented out much faster and much cleaner when we use DAP and Ferment K. So we then know that the yeast are going to be stoked. So they get 50% of the Ferment K and 50% of the DAP addition in that first 24 hours. And then they get 25% at 48 hours, and they get 72, or the remaining 25% at 72 hours. Before you add these additions, it should be noted that we degas. So we take a stir stick and we twirl it around in the carboy, and we let the CO2 that's in the solution bubble out pretty gently at first, because you don't want a mead volcano. You don't want all that CO2 coming out and rapid evacuation happening, like putting a Mentos in a 7-Up bottle. So you stir it gently at first, let some of the CO2 out, then a little more vigorously, and hopefully get it to the point where there's not much CO2 left when you stir it. Now you can add these nutrients, and you're also introducing oxygen, more oxygen to the environment during that degassing process. So it's degassing / aeration, and then nutrient addition. And again, you do 50% of the DAP and Ferment K the first 24 hours mark, and then 25% at the 48-hour mark, and 25% at the 72-hour mark. So that's advanced mead making right there. Temperature is clutch. So your yeast has a temperature range that it thrives in. And if you get outside of that temperature range, they can start to get stressed. They can either slow down if it gets cold, or they can start to produce off flavors if it gets hot. And that's a rule of thumb that's not governed in every case. But some yeast, like champagne yeast, can ferment down to like 38 degrees or something. It'll go slow, but it'll go super clean. If you put champagne yeast EC1118, EC1118, when it gets warm, gets really hot and fusely. Fusel alcohol. So there's like 3 chemical compounds that yeast produce as a byproduct of fermentations. There's phenols, there's there's alcohol, and there's esters. So phenols and higher order alcohols can get like gross. Like butanol is a higher order alcohol, like wood alcohol, nasty, hot tasting, breathing fire kinds of byproducts. Butanols are like phenols, excuse me. Phenols can get really hot and harsh tasting, like rubber. Higher order alcohols can get hot and harsh tasting, and then esters, if they get overpowering, like green apple or Band-Aid, these are esters that can get really intense. So if you're out of the temperature range, the likelihood that you're going to get one of these or all three of these off flavor components increases. So you really want to keep your yeast in the temperature range that they are happy with. When you mix the honey and water, some people advocate sanitizing the honey and water by pasteurizing, like low temp, long period of time. We don't do that. We think that denatures the floral and aromatic compounds that make each honey special. So I recommend folks don't do that. There's a risk that you're going to introduce wild bacteria to your fermentation, but I think the best solution to that is a really vigorous known yeast that gets up and going and finishes fermentation quick, and then you're at 12% alcohol and no sugar, and the likelihood that a spoilage organism is going to take over is low. Levy's here. Levy does some sales. I'm doing a class, Levy. Oh. Sorry, Levy. All right, that was funny. So that's why we don't heat our mead. All right, so different styles of mead. There's as many styles of mead as there are styles of beer and wine. And if you've not tried a mead that you like yet, the likelihood is that it wasn't made well, so it had those off flavors that I was talking about. Or it was in a style that you're not naturally into, right? It's like having someone pour you a Coors Light and go, this is beer. This is what all beer tastes like. It's like, I can't even begin to tell you how wrong that statement is, because how do you explain to someone all the colors of the rainbow when they've only ever been exposed to like fuchsia? That's how I feel the mead market is right now. Like, people don't even understand that it's a whole spectrum, and that what Golden Coast Mead doing is just like a frequency band on that spectrum, and each mead is like another little wavelength. But there's meads way over here that are totally different, right? Like dessert style meads is kind of where a lot of people see mead at. But we do ale yeast meads that are dry and effervescent and lighter bodied and great for a hot day. And then there's people doing everything in between. There's people doing 6% alcohol meads. Ours are like 12%. So that's like a different area on the spectrum. So these are some pictures of different styles. You know, can throw spices in there, can throw fruit in there, can throw all kinds of things in there. But we recommend getting started with just a basic traditional mead. Traditional mead is just honey and water and yeast. And if you find a beautiful honey and you find a pretty neutral yeast that's going to ferment clean, and you have a clean fermentation, you're going to get a beautiful mead on the back end. Hopefully relatively quick. But the first mead I had that my grandpa gave me was 15 years old, and it tasted like sunlight and flowers in the glass. So aging mead is good. Varietal is this idea, like if the bees are just gathering nectar from one kind of flower, then they're going to make honey that just has a very specific flavor. So a varietal honey mead is, for instance, in this case, our orange blossom Mirth in a bottle has this great citrus character that goes everywhere from citrus flowers and nectar to citrus fruit, and then like even orange skin to it. We used one of those red wine yeasts, and it really pulled out a lot of that orange citrus skin. This was our first package, so it's fun. You know, if your first package doesn't embarrass you, you waited too long. And the labels were just a little too long on this, so you can see in the bottom right picture that like there are these creases from where the label didn't quite fit on the bottle. But whatever, minimum viable product. You're out there. People are giving you $20 for a bottle, and you're like, oh my God, I can do this. So do that. All right, melomels are what you get when you make mead with honey and fruit. I think it's kind of a jargony word, and I like to call them fruit meads. But as people nerd out on them, and there's an appetite for that jargon, then melomel, great. Sizer is what you get when you make a cider mead. Take apple juice and honey and ferment it. There's a huge tradition of doing this in England. There's an argument that the tradition of wassailing, where you like go around, here we go, wassailing among the leaves of green, right, pouring drinks out for the trees, was typically a sizer. Piment is what you get when you mix grapes and honey and ferment it. There's an argument that Bacchus was the god of piment before he was the god of wine, because growing that much grapes would have been a lot harder for our hunter-gatherer ancestors. So mixing whatever fermentables they had and fermenting it was probably what they did. And in fact, there's archaeological evidence of that in China, 7000 BC. There were these pochards that were analyzed with a dust of an alcoholic beverage made from honey, rice, and I think grapes. So throw it in there and see what happens. Metheglin is the jargony word for mead made with spices and herbs. In Old Welsh, it was a word for medicine, which is pretty cool. So drink your medicine, drink your spice herb mead. So that's an overview of what we're doing. Oh, I killed it on timing. No, I'd say I did pretty well. This is our contact. So we're a growing business trying to stack functions, but with limited time. We're definitely interested in mentoring other mead makers and growing the mead industry on a kind of horizontal replication model. And we want to help other people. Now, do we need to charge for consulting? Probably. If people wanted to pay us, that would definitely increase the likelihood of me answering your questions in a timely fashion. So I hope that is interesting to some of you guys, and you want to follow up. I hope that this recording is valuable. $2.99 to buy this. It will be a crash course in mead making that will hopefully give you all the terms that you need to search and a good overview for how to make your first meads, so that you can get a couple batches of mead under your belt, see what those terms are, and dig into them. Gotmead.com is a great resource. The Complete Mead Maker by Ken Schramm is a great resource. So I recommend picking up that book, The Complete Mead Maker, and I recommend getting on gotmead.com. Reddit/mead is another really good resource too. There's a lot of people out there who are very passionate about mead making and are happy to share. I think we're one of the top 10 meaderies in the country. A couple of them are bigger than us, but we're nipping at their heels. So talking about the business model and growing the business, happy to do that too. We've got 2 tasting rooms and distribution in 5 states and about 500 retail accounts. So I think that brings me to Q&A, right, Josiah?
Yeah, awesome, man. Thank you. Great presentation. Oh, I see you got Michael Jordan here with us. Excited to have Michael on here so you guys can nerd out, because I don't know as much about mead as you guys do. You guys are the experts. So that's awesome to have you here. Mike, I see your Michael, I see your microphone is muted. So I don't know if we'll be able to hear you. All right, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and start the poll now. So you guys can just take a look at that poll and answer the questions. And then while you're doing that, or as you finish that, please start filling up that Q&A. We want to get your questions, and we'll let Mike and Frank start talking as well, so you can ask even more questions. And I'm sure more questions will come up as the Q&A goes on. Feel free to add more questions as we go. So I'm going to launch the poll. Go ahead and start filling that out. And in the meantime, we'll just let Mike get set up.
And I can get into some of the questions that have already been typed in, Joe.
Okay. Let's hold off on the questions just for a minute here. Let's let them fill out the poll here real quick.
Cool.
And then we'll jump into it.
Great.
Just as we're going, or to start kind of kick off and fill up some time now while the poll's being answered and questions are coming in. Could you kind of run us through like your daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal kind of activities that you do at Golden Coast Mead? Just to give give people an idea of, like, if they're going to start a mead company, what do they need to be doing on a daily kind of basis, and seasonal, daily to seasonal.
Well, so that's a little loaded. Like, that assumes that folks want to do a full-time production meadery, or rather, I can speak as a full-time production meadery. And
Grant Schultz.
When Grant Schultz was out here, he was like, "You're telling me I could just buy one of these tanks make 300 gallons of mead and sell $10,000 worth of mead with it. I should do that, you know. So like in terms of function stacking, I think that's a really low resource, low infrastructure way to add an element to a permaculture farm. It doesn't require that much specialization. You've probably got the customer there already. You're probably already selling them some stuff. They probably want some alcohol. If you've got good tasting alcohol with a great story, they're probably going to buy one bottle of it for 20 bucks, you know. So 300 gallons is enough to make $10,000. And that operation is one honey harvest. You need 55 gallons of honey for a 300 gallon batch. So one honey harvest, typically you're lucky if your hives give you 1 to 3 gallons. So you need something between 55 and 20 beehives. And Michael can speak to that a little bit better from his experience.
Well, I think that, can you hear me? My mic's on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. An average beehive yields you about 25 to 30 pounds of honey. If you're getting more than that, you must have less hives. That's about balancing and equaling your hives. But we try to go for, out of 175 hives, we try to produce each one to produce roughly 30 pounds of honey. Most of our honey is a little bit sweeter than most and then back flavored down, because we're using about anywhere from 3 to 3.5 pounds of honey per gallon of water. So you're looking at, if we have 30 pounds, you're only looking at about 10 gallons, right?
So per hive.
Yeah, for hive equivalency, right, of what we're trying to produce. So it depends on how many hives you are, the location, what types of honey you're using for flow. Some honeys, I mean, you guys get all kinds of different kinds of honey. I mean, I've been shipping honey in. It's, you know, when you get clover honeys, apple honeys, their sugar content is over 84%, I believe is what it is. And if you get more of your wildflowers, or you adjust down to what's it like, sour wood and stuff like that, you're only hitting around 78 to 82% of sugar content in your honey. So some of those variable about the sugar content, also with the honey and your flows. So the one thing that I found out of making mead is that every year you are going to have different flows of nectar. That this year clover might be super badass, man, and then you're not going to have a wet season, and your clover flow is going to be lower, so you're not going to get some of the flavors, the amounts, or even the colorations, depending on even seasons. I don't know, have you seen that, Frank?
Oh yeah. Variability in honey is huge, but you know, when we're tasting honeys prior to making a batch, so I think Michael is speaking as an expert, and I think our audience has an opportunity to just like get their feet wet. So for some basic business modeling, there's a lot of layers of complexity that you could work into your model, but the likelihood that that's going to prevent action and get you on the road so you start to learn is, I think, high. So I think the rule of thumb that Michael confirmed was like a hive of healthy bees producing between 20 and 30 pounds a year is not unreasonable. And we like to think that and it varies a little bit based off of sugar density of the honey, but 12 pounds per gallon is our rule of thumb. And we use 1 to 4 honey to water. So to make 5 gallons of mead, you need 1 gallon of honey. To make 300 gallons of mead, you need 60 gallons.
Yeah, 60 gallons
of honey. So that's like 1 drum. And that means that you're roughly 30 beehives. So if you could stack 30 beehives on your property, turn it into, let's see, so that's roughly 1,000 liters. Say a 500 milliliter bottle, which is what we use, gets you 2,000 bottles. Then you're charging 20 bucks for a bottle of 500 milliliter varietal mead just for your farm. And you're losing probably 20% during the process. So that's 2,000 bottles minus 20% is like 1,600 bottles times $20 is like $32,000 for like keeping your bees and making 1 batch of mead a year. That assumes you can sell every bottle of it and that it's great. But I think if you follow the process that we laid out, the likelihood you're going to make a marketable mead is much higher than it was 3 years ago before the whole staggering nutrient addition and aeration thing was understood. So yeah, if folks are excited about the opportunity to make an extra 32K, you know, maybe it merits further research and getting into the weeds, like Michael was talking about, like where different honey flows have different sugar densities and flavor profiles are kind of weird. But what we do to overcome that is just call it, this is a specialty batch from this apiary. And it is a reflection of this year in this place, like the wineries do with vintages. You know, yeah, it's Merlot every year, but this year it was different from last year. And so you call it a vintage and you pour some samples for people and you get them excited about how they can taste the sage in one year and they can taste the clover in the other year. And then they want to give you $40, one for, you know, buy 2 bottles. So that's kind of the premise that we hope works for folks in this community.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I totally believe that. I belong to, you know, I traveled to the Miser Cup. We traveled to Got Mead, and basically I don't really enter a lot of events, but I like to go to the hotel rooms afterwards and do the swap and exchange, right? Where the guy's going, this is a 7-year-old or this is 15-year-old bottle. What do you got to exchange? And you guys all sample and taste. And then the next thing you're walking out with, you brought a case and you leave with the case, but I've got some, you know, fig that's like 10 years old, man. And it's sitting around and it's aged well. And you're only going to get it from that guy. It's not like you're going to go buy it off a shelf. Some of these guys have some meads that are super good. Josiah went with us to Hunter's Mood Meadery in Colorado, and the guy made an Earl Grey tea one, right, that he only makes so much of it. And that's a good little barter and exchange amongst, I think, great mead makers. And that maybe if you do have 20 extra cases of a good 10-year-old mead that's been really superior, man, you're going to get $120 a bottle. Some of these guys that have been collecting wines in their wine cellar, they're paying big money to collect stuff for their wine cellars. And I have people hit me up all the time for my apple brag if it's been over 5 years, that they really want that to see if it still carbonates and pushes out, and, you know, to get a couple bottles. So I'm with you. I think the aging of mead and the holding off on it sometimes brings a higher value on some good product, brother.
Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunity, and you know, it gets me so excited to think about different people approaching it different ways and just blowing open this category, grounded in this desire to regenerate agriculture and help the bees with it and beekeepers. So it's exciting to share, and love to knock out each one of these questions if that's cool, Joe.